about maybe 360, 350 BC, you have what's known today as we call it the Tanakh. Now, right after that, in 333 BC, the Greek Empire came from the north and from the west and conquered the whole Middle East. So what happened at that point was there really didn't seem to be any unified authorized text of the law and the prophets. So after the Greek culture and the Greek language came into the Middle East, even the rabbis became bilingual. They learned Greek also. And so they translated the text of the Bible, and you had the first authorized full text of the law and the prophets actually was in Greek. And that was the text that was used mostly by the apostles when the New Covenant was written, was quoting the Old Testament from this Greek text. You had the Hebraic culture, the history of the covenants, and then you have this Greek international culture and language that came together. And this brought us up into the 2nd century BC. And a very corrupt Greek king named Antiochus takes over. He defiles the temple and so on. And then you come into the main story of the history of the Maccabees and Hanukkah. Then came a family, a priestly family, the Hashmonaim, and was later known as the Maccabees because of their leader, Judah HaMaccabee. They led this rebellion that came in, and they reconquered Jerusalem, reconquered the Temple Mount, and they cleaned out the temple, and they went to rededicate the temple, and they had the 8 days to light the menorah. All this is pretty much established by history. All that story is pretty valid. Then came up a Jewish tradition, it seems to be much later, which is the story of the oil lasting 8 days. So there wasn't any priestly approved oil to light the candle. So this is what they're saying. A miracle happened. They had only enough for one day, and that oil lasted the other days. So that's a rabbinic tradition. In the year 167 about, the Jews under the Maccabees set up a Jewish state. Interestingly enough, at this time, there was another nation in Italy, Rome, which was a competing power against Greece. And at that time, Rome actually endorsed this new Jewish state. But after that, then the Romans came in and conquered them again. That this new Jewish state that had overthrown the corrupt Greek state, they had their own power, and then they began to be corrupt. From the Pharisees and the Sadducees, there was fighting there. It was right at that time that the Romans came in, and the Romans conquered Israel almost exactly 100 years after the time of the Maccabees. And then the Romans came in 63 years BC with the great general Pompey. You come in to the period of the Gospels and the New Covenant, and what do you have? You had the Jewish covenantal history and language of Hebrew, you had the Greek culture and language around it, and you had the international Roman Empire and government and order. It set it up perfectly so that Yeshua could come then as the King of the Jews, be crucified, and then even have it in the 3 different languages. At this time, there was a huge expectation of the coming of the Messiah. What were the people intuitively expecting? They were expecting, as Judah Maccabee overthrew the Greeks, they were expecting for another figure, a military, charismatic, religious figure to come up and overthrow the Roman Empire. And Yeshua was born into that atmosphere. That's why there was a huge messianic expectation. He didn't have to introduce the idea of the Messiah. The Gospels have the first written mention of the holiday, the Feast of Dedication, which is mentioned in John 10. That there isn't much discussion about the holiday, which kind of fits what seems to have happened in first century Judaism, that the holiday was there, but it wasn't a big central holiday. In this last 100 years or so, when the population of Jews in America grew to very large, and they were in the midst of an evangelical Christian culture, then there came up sort of this parallel celebration between Christmas and Hanukkah. There's not really a mention of a Christmas celebration or that much of a Hanukkah, but in modern, at least American Christian evangelical culture and Jewish exilic culture, the two became parallel. And therefore, the importance of the miracle of the light and the oil of Hanukkah became very important because it had to be something matching the miracle of the Christmas story. So it had these two miracle stories going on. Of the 25th day of Kislev starts the Feast of Lights of Hanukkah, and the 25th day of December starts the Christian traditional holiday of the Feast of Lights of Yeshua being born into the world as the light of the world. I find it interesting to note that if you walk through the first words of Genesis chapter 1, when you come to the 25th word in the book of Genesis, in Hebrew, it's the word light. When Israel became a nation, the holiday of Hanukkah became very popular, actually among the secular Israeli Zionists, because it had this image of strong, like the Israeli pioneers and the new army and sports teams. Israeli sports teams are called Maccabees. We have a parallel Olympic Games called the Maccabee Games. And so there was this image. It became an image of secular, non-religious. It was almost an anti-Jewish traditional holiday. Then as the Orthodox community in Israel has grown more and more, it's taken on just the opposite meaning of saying the Jewish culture is coming against the Greek culture. And it was interpreting Israeli secular culture as being Greek and European, and the holiday of Hanukkah is Judaic tradition against the Greek secular. So you've got the competition with Christian Christmas on one side, the Israeli adopting this as its pioneer, strong Israeli image, and then you have the religious Jews saying, no, this should be a Jewish rabbinic rejection of secular culture. It's kind of a holiday now that everybody is celebrating together. Now remember, when God designed the tabernacle, one of the items in the tabernacle was a golden lampstand, a golden menorah. And part of the job of the priests in the tabernacle and then later in the temple was to keep this lampstand, this menorah, lit. Then Solomon took the lampstand and he took it from the Mosaic tabernacle and he put it into the Solomon temple. But you don't have that much of an interpretation of what is the meaning of this. Of course, something good. You come up another 500 years after Solomon to the time of Zechariah, and he has a vision of this 7-branch lampstand, and he has a prophecy about it, and he describes a lampstand together with 2 olive branches or olive trees combining together with it. And so what he's saying is both the lampstand and the olive tree, from which the oil comes from the olive tree into the lampstand, to fill the lampstand, to light it with fire and light. This has symbolic, prophetic, spiritual meaning. But he still didn't say exactly what it was. When we finally come up to the new covenant, then Yeshua as the Messiah says, I am the light of God who've come to light up the world. And he said, if you receive me by faith, you will receive the Spirit of God, and then you will become the light of the world. Yeshua solves gives the prophetic meaning of this lampstand and of this Chanukiah. The last reference is, of course, when you come up to the book of Revelation. And in Revelation chapter 1, you have an appearance, an apocalypse of Yeshua, and he's standing in the midst of 7 lampstands, and it says very clearly, the lampstands represent the ecclesia, the kehillah, the church, the people of God, which is the people within Israel and the nation.